Ready.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The War Report. And we're back with colossal news. The war is over. It's perfect.
Colossal.
I think I think we're up to the 10th war that
The
Trump has
president of
ended.
peace did it again.
He did it again. The
He did.
menorah,
How does he
the
do it?
menorah even said he's the Prince of Peace. The
Yeah.
menorah that he got from, I don't remember which organization it was. It was one of them. But it was a very nice gift, and I'm sure that there's no broader implications. That I'm sure that nobody had any sort of political or religious message they wanted pushed with that kind of gift. And no, I think it's great. It's solved. The speech was given, and NATO is over. Finally, those freeloading Europeans are off our backs, and they're still our vassals. They still need to do everything they can to defeat the Russians and open up the Strait of Hormuz, and the Great Royal Navy is going to have to secure all the oil assets so Perfidious Albion can distribute it piecemeal across Europe. It's all part of the Trump plan. This is what Q was leading to the entire time. I'm glad that we were such strong plan trusters throughout this entire process, and that our confidence in him never wavered over this past decade because we're finally getting the results. This is everything I voted for, and I'm being serious. It's the downfall of the American empire. You see people
How
freaking
did he
out about
do it?
you're seeing people freaking out about this. Like, look, for once in my life, I'm finally getting what I voted for. I voted for the dismantling of the American empire, and here we are.
Yeah, I mean, what I said, what I said in 2024 to a friend and coworker, it kind of shocked her. I said, I'm kind of hoping if I were an American, I might vote for Trump. I might not. If I do, it would be because that would be funny shit. Maybe maybe, maybe America would get so divided that I mean, I didn't feel that way when the Floyd riots were happening. I mean, I was furious. But I don't know. I mean, this is an incredibly black pilling show. People complain that we black pilled them. We black pilled ourselves. So, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, in all seriousness, as much as I have my principal oppositions to the American empire, I've been on record saying many times that these processes are seldom clean, and that somebody who can cleanly dismantle an empire is truly a great man of history, even if he's not recognized as such. Because
He
even
doesn't know he's doing that.
even
Come on.
even if you live in the
Look, you are so American. Trump he's such a genius.
he
Maybe
is.
he is.
He is 100 and, I don't know, 96 IQ. I don't know what they have met on higher than my IQ probably, because he's just such a genius. But I do have to say once again, on the serious note, that if someone, not Trump, but someone in the abstract, can dismantle an empire in a very clean manner, that is somebody who does deserve to be considered great, even if not by conventional standards. Because as much as one may lament the American empire and everything that it stands for, living through the collapse of these kind of systems is never fun. We have within living memory of some of us, not myself, but you, the collapse of the Soviet Union, where even somebody who may have despised everything the Soviet system stood for, had all a number of ideological disagreements with it, vehement opposition to it, still recognizes, if they're being honest, the absolute travesty that happened in your on the Eurasian landmass as a whole as a result of the collapse of the Soviet Union, from economic to political crises to even sowing the seeds for many of the conflicts that we see today, particularly the one in Ukraine.
Oh yeah. Yes, I mean people I think are very familiar now with the 90s in Russia and the former Soviet states, but also the other satellite states, of that great behemoth. Georgia had a civil war, Armenia, um
Even Tajikistan.
yeah, like of course then Chechnya, That's the one most people are familiar with. But there were these other conflicts
The
that took place that,
Transnistrian War, that was
yes,
one
that's
of them.
another one. And of course, although Yugoslavia was not part of the Warsaw Pact, of course, it had two wars, uh, definitely directly related with the collapse of the Soviet Union. I mean, it was a war that could have been averted. Uh, Clinton decided not to. A peace agreement had been reached on the evening before the Columbine shooting, and famously, Primakov was on a flight. The shooting happened. He also learns that the same day, the bombing by the Americans began, or that the war had broken out. Well, no, the bombing had not started yet. Um, the terms that they had agreed upon were scrapped, essentially, if I'm not mistaken, by the Bosnians and the Croats, as far as I understand. And it was Zimmerman who was Clinton's diplomat, envoy, uh, that had made the statement, had convinced them not to sign a peace agreement.
Yeah,
Not very different than what happened in Ukraine.
it's actually strikingly similar. And if the outcome of that war tells us anything, Ukraine is going to be in a far worse position because the Lisbon Agreement that you're referring to, that they got the factions in Bosnia and Herzegovina to agree to, was much more favorable to both the Croats and the Bosniaks than Dayton ended up being. And
Yeah.
that throughout the war, the Serbs actually fought themselves into a much more favorable position despite the opposition from the American Empire, the NATO bombing
Yes.
campaigns. And while ultimately the collapse of Yugoslavia, the way it happened, was ultimately a loss for the Serbs, there still were immediate concessions that were made to some of their interests, particularly in Bosnia,
Yeah.
because of the way that the federal state worked out. Because it was supposed to be a Swiss style state where you had individual ethnic cantons in one unitary state. Now, Bosnia is a unitary state in the loosest sense. I suppose with the whatever high commissioner the Europeans put there, he does act as effective dictator, effectively a colonial viceroy over it. So it
Yeah.
is a unitary state in that sense. But you look at the state structure of the Federation and Republika Srpska, those were major concessions because they realized if we're going to fight the Serbs into an actual losing position in Bosnia, now Kosovo is a different story altogether, but in Bosnia, then it's going to require a lot more commitment than a bombing campaign. And even the fall of Milosevic required a lot more commitment than a bombing campaign. You didn't have U.S. troops directly on the ground or NATO troops directly on the ground in an active combat sense. Sure, they served as an occupation force afterwards, but it had to do with a lot of on the ground agitation of opposition groups there, of people sick of the war who took to the streets in the typical color revolution fashion and overthrew Milosevic that way, which
Yeah.
strikingly is probably the model that they anticipated for Iran. They hammer the regime for 70 days and then they bring out the NGOs and the all the opposition factions on the streets and they all protest and establish moderate liberal government and make all the concessions to America and Israel that they've been seeking. But as we're seeing right now, that's not the case. But I do think we're getting a little ahead of ourselves here.
Yeah.
But with that being said, I suppose you have a minutia minute for us.
Yeah, minutia minute. So let's start with the overall map first. You can see that the Russians have begun focusing on, pushing this border into northern Ukraine. It goes right up to like the Kursk, Chernigiv border, not just the Sumy border. So it's pretty extensive, and of course around the Kharkov area, basically northeast of the city. But we'll begin with Zaporozhye. And the Ukrainians have again been successful in taking more territory from the Russians. They've taken over the first line of defense. This is an area north of Gulyapolye. The Russians have managed today, by the time people hear this, it'll be like 36 hours old. So I don't know what's going to happen. But the Russians have pushed back a little bit and are trying to stop this hemorrhaging of this salient that the Ukrainians have formed. They are definitely going for Gulyapolye. If you go to the next slide, this will give you an idea of where Gulyapolye is. And the Ukrainians have, I mean, it's not colored. So this is an area that's difficult to supply for both sides. There are no major towns.
Ah, the
Uh,
fabled gray zone.
yes, the gray zone, exactly. But if you if you look at the map, um, that yellow outline of the Ukrainians, if you stack two more on top of that, that's the territory that the Ukrainians have taken in the last 6 weeks. So, or let's say 5 weeks. So they've been very persistent on this area. I think the main reason for that is that the Russians are going westward and sort of gobbling up both the first and second line of defense. Again, not hitting the line from a southerly direction going north, but rather from east to west. The next slide will show you the territory that the Russians have secured in Privilya. Again, this is a very fluid area. I don't know what's going to happen, but the next map will show you basically what the Russians are trying to do. They're trying to create this pincer to make sure that they lock off this area, that this gray zone where the Ukrainians are desperately looking to solidify. Um, both sides have advantages and disadvantages in fighting this area. Now, it may be an issue later. It may even be an issue in the near term, but the Russians are still persisting in fighting on the whole scope of the front from Zaporozhye all the way to the Sumy region, and as I mentioned earlier, the Chernigov region. So they don't seem that bothered by this. But as we've seen in this war, things can turn around after years and months of very little gains. So if are you on that slide with all the arrows and everything?
Yeah, I can switch.
Yes,
I
that's
can
it.
switch to it now. So
Yeah. So you can see what the Russians are trying to do here. That's why they went for this area. Again, this is not going to be an area for either side, but especially for the Russians, it will not be an area that'll be easy to defend. It took them months just to take this section well, technically it's Dnepropetrovsk, because I say Zaporozhye, it is now totally in Zaporozhye, but the land that they lost was in Dnepropetrovsk. And if you look at the slide, to the far left, the Russians have expanded their control over another town, Trnovate, and they've moved into Boykove. So I guess that's in a way now they need to go a lot more northwestwardly than they are doing here. But I'm assuming part of the reason that they're doing that is not only will it be important in the future, but it is to spread the Ukrainian forces from focusing in this salient that they're developing. Anyways, that's as far as we'll go for Zaporozhye. It's static on the other end of Zaporozhye, near Zaporozhye city. Um, uh, Not much has changed since the last show. The Russians made some incursions. They're very small. You know, the show only has so much time to devote to that. The next slide is Pokrovsk. So this isn't actually Pokrovsk. This is a town outside of Pokrovsk called I believe it's Grushinya, or as the Ukrainians call it, Hryshinya.
I tell you this every
So
time. You don't need to make those
yeah,
clarifications.
so it was captured a few days ago, and then yesterday, this map is already a day old. The Russians have expanded their control. The Ukrainians have not made further attempts to go into Pokrovsk. Everybody remembers the helicopter landing that ended in disaster. There was another one with the Scala unit. Um, Very brutal fighting. An Abrams tank was destroyed. Two or three infantry fighting vehicles were destroyed. I saw another brutal video in Kupiansk. We'll get to Kupiansk. Very fluid situation there as well, where the Ukrainians are cleaning up, except, there's about four guys. They're cleaning up a house. They're convinced it's a fighter in there. Turns out there was a Russian fighter by himself. And what's striking is there's at least two voices who are speaking American English.
Huh.
And the shooting into the video is very dark, but they're shooting into one of the rooms, and you swear there's nothing there. And then a grenade goes off. One of the commanders, Ukrainian commanders, was killed. And of course, the Russian, essentially, he ended his life, but he took one of them with him. So, again, the brutality of this war. Honestly, there's some videos that in some of the chat groups people share, and it's like, I know what I'm going to see. I've seen it 100 times, and I just can't. I can't look at it anymore. That's what I've come to
Yeah,
now.
there's a fine line you have to walk when it comes to analyzing this war and watching every combat footage drone video that comes out of it, because at a certain point it doesn't help you to actually understand the situation. You're just watching wanton violence at that point.
Mm-hmm. Like, honestly, I feel sorry for any soldier on either side that has to deal with drones. There's something so devastating, especially the soldiers who have made up their minds to die. I've seen both Russians and Ukrainians who just faced a drone, and the drone is teasingly circling about them or flying very slowly towards them. I often wondered, like, why do this? I mean, they're no longer a combatant.
I mean, there's a
So
reason the drone operators always get summarily executed whenever they're captured. There's no prisoner
yes,
of war. There's nothing like that. It's they are repaid with the same lack of mercy that they often show. And I'm
yes,
not justifying on either side, but it's a reap what you sow kind of situation, if I just had to put it that
it
way.
really is. It really is. Because it's an infuriating thing to watch, and it's a grave miscarriage of justice, even if that justice isn't written down exactly. But I mean, it is. But in the fluidity of battle, um, you know, drone operators could do better. There are instances where I see the drone is guiding them. You know, they've made overtures that they'll surrender and so on.
And this may be a bit shallow to say as an observer, but the position I hold is that you can have the debate, the moral philosophical debate about whether or not there's any honor to be found in war. But I will say, regardless of what side you come down on that question, by and large, when it comes to these guys like the drone operators, 99 times out of 100, there's not.
Yeah, yeah. So the next front we're going to look at is Konstantinovka. It's been active for the last 3-4 days. Um, I've outlined basically the limits of the city. You can see the areas that the Russians have taken. The Russians are now in the central area. That's what the little pistol icon is. Of course, the Russians very early on took the residential areas in the, let's say, the eastern, southeastern section of the city, and then they took the high rises in the western part of the city. And from there, they've catapulted themselves into the central area near the railroad station. It's um it's a decent sized town. I think it was like 42,000 people. It's small by some standards. However, it's part of that last line of defense. North of that is Kramatorsk, and north of that is Slavyansk. So make of that what you will. This is one of the important cities that the Russians have to take. The next slide will give you a blow up, an idea of the area that the Russians have moved into. You can see that if you go on a southwesterly direction from where the pistol icon is, the gray outline that was captured the day before, and it's part of the high-rise complexes immediately adjacent to it in blue. There are other high-rises that the Ukrainians control. There's a fair number of them. Both sides have a fair number. Um, by no means is this battle over anytime soon. The next slide will show you I think it's the E54 highway. Whatever the name is. The line that you see here is the line that the Russians need to secure for supplies coming from the east. Now, before this point, they have been coming from the south, and which I'm sure is still taking place. Uh, Ilin, Ilo, what is it? Ilinovka. Ilinovka was a town that they captured a few days ago. That town basically acts as a buffer, a kind of protection for roads leading from the south going into the salient that the Russians have opened up. But really, what they want is that highway that I've outlined. The main reason that it's been difficult, you can see is in the next slide, is the trench network above this area. And I've circled that in the top right-hand corner. There were times that the Russians controlled a larger portion of this and then lost it. They regained some of it 2 weeks ago, and that may or may not play a role, but they will have to take care of this area first before any kind of expansion into Konstantinivka can take place on the east side of the city. The city is bifurcated, I believe, by a canal and a railroad track. You can see faintly how it goes on a northwest southeast direction. Then we move into the area of Slavyansk. This is an area that is southeast of Slavyansk. You can see the gray outlines. Those were captured a day or two ago. You can see the red outline that was captured today. And then that squiggly line that I've drawn, that's the canal. This is an area where the Russians will have to take, primarily because it acts as a barrier, but also because it's very well fortified by the Ukrainians. And if we move northwest of here, closer to Slavyansk, you can see what the Russians are trying to do. In this slide, at the very, very bottom center, off center at the bottom on the edge is the area that we were just looking at. You can see the gray outlines here. Those are territories that the Russians got about 2, 3, 4 days ago, depending on which gray outline you're talking about. Now, you can see the arrows are pushing towards this section of Mykolaiivka. Now, Mykolaiivka is the most fortified area in this area of Donbass before you get to Slavyansk. And this is the area that will be a real trial, honestly, to get to. As you can see, there's only one village, Rai Oleksandrovka, um, where the three arrows are pointing to. That might give a bit of respite before the push to Mykolaievka, but in any case, this is the objective before any kind of assault on Slavyansk takes place. Now, of course, from the north, the Russians will also have to deal with the area south of Liman. Next, we move to Kupiansk, and again, very fluid area. There've been all kinds of changes, and I should also tell you that neither side, both in Konstantinovka and in Kupiansk, are eager to share any kind of information. There is a lot of fighting happening in these areas, but neither side wants to reveal exactly what territory it is that they control
Between
for
that and
obvious purpose.
Iran, the information blackout is probably the worst it's been for really the entire war.
Yes, these maps honestly come 2 or 3 times a week at most. They used to be a daily occurrence, but not so now, and it's been this way honestly since the end of January, and we are just now in April. So you can see that the Russians in this area southeast of Kupiansk, I've circled it near the top left-hand corner, but off center to the bottom is a vertical salient that the Russians have taken. Um, Again, I've always said that this is the area that the Russians should have worked on before totally assaulting Kupiansk. The fact is they went into Kupiansk and captured the entire city without having good supply lines, and they paid the price for that because they've lost half the city. However, if you look at all the red outlines and gray outlines, faint as they are, you can kind of see what they've been doing for the last few weeks. And the gray, not the gray outlines, but the no man lands, the gray zones that you see, um, that to me indicates that the Ukrainians are having a difficult time stopping the Russians from proceeding. Now, there's also a highway that leads from here into Kupiansk, and that is also another objective. Once they have that highway and a good buffer around the highway, then things should progress more quickly. If you go to the next slide, you'll see kind of what I mean. Um, it'll explain it. You can see the area that the Russians have taken. You can see the directions that they want to go further. There's a pincer movement that they're working on right now. That arrow that you see in is sort of in the top center, um, going on a northeasterly direction, that's the highway. The next slide will show you the highway itself. This is the air. This is what the Russians want, and why taking the area that they did take today is very important. Now, the only areas that the Russians don't control are in no man's lands, in gray zones, and they stretch into an area which is Kupiansk itself, but also in areas just east of it. And I promise you, we're almost done. Next, we go into the Kharkov region. Kupiansk is in Kharkov, but I've outlined on this map where Kharkov city is. This is the second largest city in Ukraine. It's 1.1, or was before the war, 1.1 million people. It is a very sprawling city. It is not dense in the same way that some other European cities are.
Once considered the
Uh,
jewel of the Russian Empire.
yes, and a lot of industrial sectors, very a very difficult city to take, believe me. And anyway, so now you can see where the Russians are moving here. At the top, you see that they're moving well south of Vovchansk now. They've took it well over a month ago now, and they've opened up new sectors north of Kupiansk, and you can see basically what it is that they're trying to do. they want to cut this area off because that will make not only an assault on Kharkov easier, and if this looks by the way, if this looks anything like a replay of early 2022, it is. This is an area that the Russians controlled at one time, and it is why they got so close to the city, edging on the suburbs and shelling it regularly. It is because they controlled this area at one point. Um, and then, as we all know, there was the peace agreement. They pulled out of certain areas. They maintained this area, but they pulled out of some of the border regions. And then the very successful early fall assault by the Ukrainians in the Kharkov Oblast completely pushed the Russians out of this area. So the reason they want this is, of course, supply routes. That's the main reason. And a buffer zone for Belgorod. There was an attack in Zaporozhye by the Ukrainians. HIMARS were fired. 6 civilians were killed, including a child. There might have been a second child. I distinctly remember one child. And then there was a piece written by a Ukrainian officer who said it's he didn't use the analogy of pulling teeth, but essentially he said that anytime we have a target acquisition and we ask, it takes too long for the Americans to supply the coordinates for the HIMARS attack. So that lets you know that every time Ukrainians target civilians, it's Americans who are doing it. Ukrainians are just pressing the button. So now we'll move into the region further northwest from here, which is the Kursk region. Well, Sumy, but no, don't sue me. You know what I mean. It's adjacent to the Kursk region. It's the Sumy region, and you can see the Russians are pushing here. They're getting close to that forested area that I talked about last year. I'm actually kind of surprised that they've managed to get to this point. So they haven't given up on this. They might use Sumy as a kind of a pressure point to disperse the Ukrainians and stop them from maybe divert their attention to the north rather than let's say the successful onslaught by the Ukrainians in Dnipropetrovsk. Anyways, let's look at these regions a little bit more closely. You can see the area that the Russians took today. This was an area, as I recall, being very swampy. It took quite a while, but in any case, the Russians are pushing here. The next slide will show you another area where they are pushing Malakurchavka. So now, before we get to that forest belt, this next slide with the arrows, Constantine, that will show you the the main pivot points, what will stop the Russians from pushing any further. The east-west line that you see, that's a river. You can see that there's a forest right underneath it. The Russians are pushing south here, but you can see the left arrow coming down. There's a town here, Kindratovka. So Kindratovka is like a pivot point. If the Russians can't take this town, they can't move further south. Certainly not from the flanks. And then lastly, this might be, yes, this is I'm sorry, these are slides of the area of Volchansk. So again, this is going back to the direction we already looked at. You can see that the Russians have expanded their control over Volchansk. in the satellite villages outside of it. And the next slide will show you what they're doing. They're building up, a border region. Again, that's to prevent the Ukrainians from sneaking back into, mainland Russia or proper Russia or pre-SMO Russia. And then lastly, we look at the another region of Sumy. Yes. Oh no, sorry. These, yeah. You know what? We've looked at these slides.
Yeah.
Sorry, too many slides. In any case, that's it for the minutia minute. Thank you for bearing with me.
No, no, it's a good update. It's been about a week and a half since the last episode, so there was going to be naturally a bit to cover. A lot of activity out of Kharkov, out of Sumy, more towards that northern sector, as you were saying, to offset that southern flank. And when it comes to, as you were saying, the actual reports on this, especially near the Konstantinivka area, that real center of the war, both in terms of geography and in terms of the objectives in the Donbass, information has been sparse. And that is, as you said, predates the Iran war, but has only intensified since the Iran war, where getting any updates about this, there's a great deal of operational secrecy, even more so than what one would expect under quote unquote normal circumstances from this war. As I
Hmm.
said earlier, it feels like the biggest blackout in information that we've had since the start of this war. And I did want to just reflect on this conflict overall and the global state of where Russia stands, particularly in relation to the Iran conflict. We'll talk about Iran in just a minute here. We'll also talk about some of the issues with Europe as well and keep the show moving in the normal direction. But while Ukraine is taking heavy losses, much heavier than the Russians, and I think anyone who is being even just the slightest bit honest with themselves can admit that, every time recently we go over this war, and this is a conversation that I know we've certainly had before, that I may have said this on the air before. You do have to realize that once again, while the Russians are winning this conflict, while their position over Europe and even the American empire as a whole is, uh, I would say, quite favorable in a longer, medium to long term sense, you also have to look at this where, once again, after 300 years, Russia is fighting a war for control of left bank Ukraine. And to me, at least, it it does raise some concern that they are having to relitigate a conflict that, by all accounts, was settled in the 17th century.
Hmm.
And of course, as we were talking about earlier, the collapse of the Soviet Union, regardless of what one might think ideologically, geopolitically, and even just down to the geography of the situation, had a profound impact that we're still working our way through. And it, I can see, and maybe I've been talking to too many Russians about this, and too many Russians, particularly from that left bank Ukraine, because I do know a few. I am in contact with a few. That even going back to the start of the 2014 crisis, this is a disaster for, if you want to use the term, Russian civilization. Now, it's a disaster that they've managed to get on top of, I think, in the best way that an empire still recovering from its near collapse can. But I do think, while we do talk about the Russian successes and even the Ukrainian resistance, we do need to realize that within the larger picture of this, there is something that is concerning from the Russian perspective, that a war is being fought for control of these lands. Not only the entirety of Ukraine, but particularly left bank Ukraine, east of the Dnieper, which one would have understood is solidly under Russian control, like I said, for over 300 years, since the mid 17th century. And we could be returning that state, but even when you consider the significantly lower amount of Russian casualties, when you look at where the Ukrainian army draws its manpower from, when you look at who Ukraine is actually putting on the front lines, they are, by and large, and this could just be a consequence of population, even though there is, of course, ethnic motive behind it, I think so. Uh, the bulk of Ukrainian population is from the left bank, and they're the men who are being conscripted, who are being put on the front line with insufficient training. So this war has resulted in forcing the Moscow government to effectively engage in its civil war with millions of its co-ethnics to try to control a piece of land that it controlled up until 1991. And like I said, well, I think this crisis can be managed and overcome, but ultimately time will tell. And I do think that things, despite the number of issues here, are going in generally the right direction for Russia. It still does have to give one looking at a broader picture of the situation a little bit of pause.
Oh yeah, definitely. Definitely. I mean, in many ways, this event represents a kind of historicity that's been ambiguous and it has not been solved, even though, as you mentioned, it's a war that has to be relitigated centuries later. Part of it is how World War II was conducted, the deals that and the strategy that Stalin used to try to appease the Western Ukrainians. Uh, do you have a Poland that includes Western Ukraine instead of giving a chunk of Poland to the Ukrainians, and then risk having antagonism between the Poles and the Ukrainians, who had a lot of bad blood, because
And
we know what the Ukrainians did to the Poles during World War II.
and then it's also kind of a hard sell when you have
But then he
Stalin.
ships nearly 500,000 Poles to Siberia to prevent so that Ukrainians can finally become a majority in their sacred land.
Yeah, and
It's it. What can I say? It's and this was always a weakness, and the Americans were always aware of it. That's why they invested so much money and so much time. And you can see that decade after decade, that although there was no support, no real support for NATO, they made sure that everyone from Soros to the State Department to every president contributed one way or another.
they
Um,
played a game of institutional capture with it. The population, by
yes,
and large, was at the very best agnostic towards NATO, ambivalent towards it, while as most of them saw themselves as part of the, I guess you could say, broader Russian world, as it were. And now we have a situation where, after that institutional capture, you have the so called peace president, where have I heard that one before, elected in 2019, who is black vanning ethnic Russians to go fight their own co ethnics, their own cousins, their own brothers in
yeah.
this cataclysmic war. And like I said, I don't want to spell the doom and gloom of Russia. I'm not necessarily in the business of doing that really for any nation. I try not to, at least. And it creates a much, I don't even necessarily want to say bleaker, but a much more sobering picture than the reality you either get from, of course, the slop you get on the mainstream media and pro Ukraine narratives about the uh, either the defender of liberal values or the shield of Europa, whichever your preferred flavor of that is, or even a lot of, I guess you could say, the pro Russian narratives that do play into the World War II mythology a little bit too much, if I'm being honest, where every Ukrainian conscript is Bandera and we just need to wage total war against the society. And like, I can understand why those feelings might develop, but it still doesn't get to the heart of the issue.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, the heart of the issue is, in a way, it's a very postmodernist thing, because part of it is in the belief of the inevitability of America and the invincibility of America. that the whole world should be like America, and that it's an inevitable thing. Kind of like Tony Blair telling you it's all inevitable, and it's all emergent. This no one can explain how it happens. It's the will of the people. You can tip the scales this way or that way, or you can become a pivot point for history and whatnot.
It's the
Eh,
insurmountable force of history. We're all atheists, by the way, and we don't believe in anything metaphysical, though.
right, right, and also, there was Poland next door, being dangled. Like, you could be Poland if only you could, slaughter and remove all the Russians that are standing in your way. You could be rich like the Poles.
Come on, make
You won't have
Brzezinski
to. You
proud.
won't have to be a janitor in Warsaw.
Yeah, I mean, I am
You
convinced.
don't have to be a maid in Gdansk. Um, you can be a proud nation, but all you have to do is get rid of all the Russians. If you could just do that, and no more economic ties with the Russians, zero, none. Your biggest trading partner, none. That's what the EU asked of the Ukrainians in Yanukovych's second term. You know, um, but speaking, you were talking about dragging their co-ethnics. Well, and it's true that a lot of these guys are ambiguous, and a lot of them are in this position because they have no way out. They can't escape, right? But that isn't to say that the rounding up of Ukrainians from all regions is taking place, and has been for a few years
No,
now.
it has intensified since the failure of the 2023 counteroffensive. I don't want to downplay
Yeah,
that, but I'm saying the way that this war was initiated in 2022 up until the 2023 counteroffensive, it,
yeah.
it was throwing the Russians against their own co-ethnics for obvious reasons, of
Oh
course.
yeah, yeah. That's been true from the very beginning. Yeah, absolutely, from the very beginning. But there was just a little bit of news. Oleg Avdeyev, two-time Ukrainian Winter Olympian, including one at Salt Lake City in 2002, has been killed. Now, this guy began working at a military recruitment center as an officer in Lvov, and he was stabbed in the neck, and he died. So this is the fifth consecutive murder of TTC officers in Western Ukraine in the last 48 hours.
Yeah,
Not
this is
month, not week, 48 hours.
yeah, this isn't in Odessa. This isn't in Kharkov. This isn't in the areas where you would expect that kind of resistance, where you actually have seen since the beginning of the war. It
Yeah,
is in the heartland of Ukraine. If I had to be honest, the real capital of Ukraine, Lvov, not Kiev. Kiev is
yeah.
is effectively, up until recently, a Russian city. Lvov, there's no mistake about it. It is the Ukrainian heartland, Polish city, but it's the Ukrainian heartland nonetheless. Make what sense of that you will.
Yeah,
But
they had to share it before, but thanks to Uncle Stalin. Anyways,
I blame the Khrushchevite influence whispering in his ear in his final
oh,
days.
for sure, for sure.
Yeah, he was
So
positioned right there.
he was, and that's always one of the funny things about wars and about these guys. It's like Joe Kent. I have to tell the truth
Are you telling me
about
that
this
Joe Kent is
imminent
going to be
war.
Khrushchev?
Yeah, on Iran, right? Like, he quits, he resigns. It's like, meanwhile, he spent like 30 years fighting these stupid illegal wars based on lies. His wife is in Syria, and she gets killed by, the very some of the jihadists linked to the very people that they're supporting in Syria, right? The people that are slaughtering Christians and Alawites, in Syria, right? And like, now he's found the time, right? I always love these guys, and like Khrushchev, like, here's where Stalin went wrong. I'm gonna have all these reforms. Meanwhile, he's suggesting like some of the craziest stuff, and Stalin trusts him for some reason, right? And his wife is from the Lvov region as well. It, it's the same thing. And with Joe Kent, right? You want to hear what he has to say, because he's from the inside. He's not a podcaster that's been telling you this for over 10 years. it's Joe Kent, right? And of course, all of them are heroes. They all fight these illegal, stupid wars based on lies and for Israel. But this one is really for Israel, right? I don't want to take away too much, right? He's
No,
done a
there's
valuable service, but
a
like,
great deal of utility in what he's done. But I will repeat what I was
but
telling
he's
you.
not a hero. I'm sorry, he's not a hero. He did the bare minimum.
I will reiterate what I was telling you off air, that the only one of these okay, only two of these former deep state guys I trust are number one, Colonel Douglas McGregor, just because he's so frank. It's, you don't have to agree with him, you don't have to necessarily like him, but he's not a guy who couches his, well, he does couch his words more than, say, my number two, Philip Girardi, but
Yeah.
but McGregor's a little more eloquent with that, but he is
Yeah.
pretty blunt, all things considered, and you can tell that he doesn't necessarily have an agenda beyond, I would think, the rare, genuine American nationalism, where he actually does see some an American nation, and not just as a vehicle of empire of some sort of ideology, whether it's of a certain flavor I like or a certain flavor I don't like. But it's him and Phil Girardi are the only two former deep staters that I actually would take their word mostly at face value. The other ones I'm taking with the mountain of salt, whether that's this Joe Kent guy, or there's a number of them, a number of these, even like a Tucker Carlson. Not that he was directly in the deep state, but he's one of those other people I take with a mountain of salt. But I can appreciate the utility of what he does.
Yeah, yeah. And that's where I stand, but it has to be said,
No,
right?
I agree. I agree.
Like, you know, I'm sorry, but like, if you're of a certain age and you're still not sure if this might just be like a bad war, and like, because you weren't so sure about the previous wars, like, I don't know what to say. Like, I mean, they are too attached to, the American mythos, and part of it is like, well, it's sometimes better to be a soldier for Jews than it is to, I'm sorry, but they look blindly at this. They look the other way, and now we're basically waiting for some kind of catastrophic event, a high, loss of life, a mass event, which will surely be the catalyst to have even more troops poured in if it happens, because we can get into the strategic nature um, of the war in Iran right now.
No,
Now,
please do.
but before we do, I should mention, just for Ukraine, just to put a bow on it. The Russians have been striking. They did over 700 drones and missiles yesterday. So they're going for energy infrastructure, a big hit again in Zaporozhye and other areas. The Ukrainians, and this is sort of like the bigger story. The Ukrainians have attacked two oil facilities in the St. Petersburg region. One is very close to, on the north side of the Finnish Gulf there, and one on the south, bordering Estonia. Now, they don't have any military there per se, right? But and as I'm told by one Russian, there's almost no military there. Of course, we know that they're attacking Russia's energy infrastructure, and they've been doing that for at least 2 years in a very concise way, but especially the last 6 months. So, what has that done to Russia? Well, this March, Russia just edged out its record for oil and gas sales that it established at the beginning of the SMO in March 2022. See, if this war in Iran keeps going, and it lasts longer than the 2-3 weeks that Trump promises he'll get out, and again, we'll get back to the strategy and why it's so important to talk about that. But even with all these debilitations and Russia being able to export its oil, take for example the so-called shadow fleet, the same day that one ship hits port in, like, goes to port in France to deliver oil, another ship, also belonging to the so-called Shadow Fleet, is boarded by the French military. The irony of that, right? So it's not having some enormous effect. In fact, it's increasing the coffers of the Russians. So I wanted to say that because I think in many ways that will help understand what the strategy at play is for, like, the war in Iran, right? Um, the other caveat that I want to mention is that, on this show, we've talked about Fortress America going all the way back to late 2019, but more so in 2020, 2021, just before the SMO. And I must say that at that time, I didn't know how this was going to happen, how America was actually, probably using a strategy of isolation, but it had to burn half the world down so it could have, like, so it could start the reindustrialization process. But if it doesn't have competitors, and so this is what destroying the Nord Stream was about. But the the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz is very much the same thing, right? That's why, Ukraine, and of course, several of these drones that have attacked these oil infrastructures in the St. Petersburg region, um, they've crashed in Estonia, Latvia, and in Finland, but mostly in Finland and Estonia,
But it's
and
Russia's
possibly
fault,
one of
by the way.
what's that?
It's Russia's fault.
Yeah, of course, it's always Russia's fault. So, like, obviously, NATO, they're fully aware, like, the Russians are aware that they're using the Baltic states and Finland to, avoid going through Russia or Belarus and then attack these infrastructures. Pardon me, just taking a sip. So, what's the strategy? I mean, everybody knows the conundrum that Trump is in right now. If he decides to put boots on the ground in Iran, it's kind of done, right? He does that, and Russia will really benefit, not just a little the way it's benefiting right now, but in a very big way. Because one of the other thing we've been saying on this show since the beginning of the SMO is that if the West does not increase production in a very dramatic way and conscripts, and is not able to fight a long-term war, then some of the supposed objectives outlined by Hegseth, hinted at by the Biden administration, won't take place, right? So both Trump and Biden, of course, wanted to destroy the Nord Stream 2. Part of that is to cripple Europe. If America has to reindustrialize, Europe cannot be allowed to prosper. And so that's the whole point of getting them to buy expensive, liquefied natural gas. That's the whole point of buying
And then you need to
much more.
plunder the Canadians to have that gas to sell to the Europeans.
Right. Um, That's why you take over Greenland. That's why you get access to those rare earths, because 98% of all rare earths are finished. They're not all mined in China, but that's where they get finished. And America needs that for its military. So helium is another one for chip manufacturing. And um, Russia, China, and Iran are some of the biggest countries that have stores of helium. So, anyways, so if Trump goes in, you could argue, I mean, that's it, right? What is going to happen to Ukraine? Industrial capacity has not increased significantly enough for the Europeans and the Americans to fight both a war in Ukraine and in Iran for long terms, right? If the whole point is to completely, not just destroy, but completely reorientate in Iran, and create a brand new Iran that's like an Iraq or a Syria, where it is sequestered along ethnic lines, and is a dysfunctional state like Libya, right? I mean, that's what Israel wants, right? But what they're doing right now for the short and medium term is not going to achieve that goal. And so Trump now is in a position where if he backs out, it's going to look weak on him and it's going to make America look weak, right? So it will discredit them. Now, money is flooding into China right now. China is considered the safe bet. And one of the reasons why this is happening is partly because of the way China has handled, this third world war that we find ourselves in over the last few years. It has to appear like the adult in the room, the peacemaker, et cetera, et cetera. It's still giving rare earth to the U.S. for its military. It's still giving chips to the Russians to fight in Ukraine. It's helping both sides, et cetera. And people and markets and people who work in markets, they want a place where they can park their money and their investments grow. And the morality of that, the contradictions don't concern them. And that's surprising because it's happening on the Eurasian continent. Before that, the safe bet was Switzerland because it was so mountainous, it was easy to defend. Um, it later became the place where you have these, you know, nefarious bank accounts, right? And then after Britain defeated the Spanish, Britain was a safe place to park it, right? And after that, especially after World War II,
And all
but
the
also
various
after World War,
colonies they had, little islands that you can hide everywhere.
that's right.
Cayman Islands, even Cyprus was a tax haven, more so in the contemporary sense, but still.
Right. And then America became the penultimate example of this safe place that you can park your money. And so much so that the generation of politicians after people like Merkel and Brown and Tony Blair, they've parked their money in America in offshore accounts in the Caribbean, not so much in Switzerland.
Oh yeah,
S-
and then
So
and then was the double benefit, and you see this with the Gulf stage, which is somewhat ironic considering the beating they're taking, where in order to get American security guarantees, you also park your wealth in America as a quote unquote buy-in as well.
that's right. That's right. Now, another reason, of course, why America wants Iran, right, is because if they take their resources, this saves American banks. And definitely bankers want this war.
Really,
Uh,
never.
they definitely want this war. And that's an anti-Semitic trope. I don't know if people are catching on. Anyhow, so um, suffice it to say, if Trump goes in, the longer he stays in, the more it will discredit America and him. However, if he wants this to be the catalyst for a new Fortress America, right? And I'm going to send you a map, and this map basically reflects what Hexeth has been talking about. If you'll just excuse me for a second, I know I have it here.
Even though I think anything
Ah,
remotely
here it is.
insightful or intelligent, whether you agree or not, that Hegseth says came out of the mouth of Steve Feinberg being repeated by Hegseth. Let's not forget that.
Yeah. So
I'll go ahead and look
this
that
is
up.
this is one of the strategic areas, their idea of the Monroe Doctrine, and you can see the areas in the middle of the Atlantic that they think should be theirs as well, right? So it's quite a large area. It's in the entire Western Hemisphere. He talks about greater North America, which includes Greenland, and as far south as Ecuador, because, well, it's on the equator. Um, and of course, that includes Venezuela and Cuba and so on. But the fact of the matter is, he still needs to. They still need to deal with Iran, and if it doesn't go well, what happens to Israel? Because right now, the Middle East, at least, the Arab street, the Muslim street, if you will, um, I mean, Iran has become a bit of a hero. Just go on Instagram, for instance, and look how many people, South Koreans, Japanese, these are people ostensibly inside the American empire, are absolutely loathe Israel. They have several influencers. Apparently, one of the K-pop bands made a deal with um, an Israeli company, and now they're getting flack from their fans, right? So what happens to them? Of course, what happens to Asia, right? If
Decades of programming and propaganda evaporated overnight.
Mhm. And the longer they stay in the Straits of Hormuz are not solved, Asia is going to suffer. This is where, yes, China certainly can deal with this issue better than Japan, obviously.
Not even to mention
It,
South Korea, much smaller nation, much less to worry about.
right, right. I'll send you another. No, yes, I'll send you this one. This map, sorry, graphic that I found. LNG inventories. You can see that China has been very careful to increase the amount of reserves. Some are saying 4 months, some are saying 6 or 8 months. They can last out the Strait of Hormuz. But the thing that should be mentioned is China's neighborhood is going to get a lot poorer, and that's not good for China either. Um, Even though they can deal with the energy um, depletion or the energy challenges, uh, some of their customers can't, and that's why it becomes a serious issue. So you could argue that maybe Trump is also doing this to force China to make a bargain. It will take time because, of course, the bet that the Chinese are making is that he will alienate South Korea and Japan. Notice that the Americans took all the THAAD systems out of South Korea 3 weeks ago. That's how soon they did that.
All right, let's talk about the most pivotal piece of East Asian news here, which is that Chinese officials were meeting with KMT representatives.
Hmm. Right. So, so if Putin definitely wants Trump to go in, he definitely wants Trump to go into Iran, um, because let's say you solve the Strait of Hormuz. From time to time, there's going to be an errant missile, and it's going to take out one of these tankers, and then you have the issue with the insurance companies like Lloyd's. The Houthis, when you look what they did to the tankers, it was minuscule compared to like what Iran has done. Yes, they boarded some of these. They fired at the American aircraft, and uh, in trying to evade one of these drones or missiles that the Houthis had attacked them with. One of the planes falls off, right? And they eventually leave. Eventually, the American Navy leaves the Red Sea, and um, they strike up a deal. And so the Houthis are now, this week, they have finally entered the war and have already launched missiles at Israel. So I guess what I'm saying is you can look at it that Trump is willing to sacrifice enough lives because it will diminish the rest of the world. If America is on a trend where, like, you could map out from 15 years ago that it would not be the sole superpower that it had enjoyed being for 25 years, then you have to diminish everybody else as well to keep the same relative amount of power. And the Ukraine war is there to solve that issue with Europe, right? To create such a loathsome antagonism, particularly between the Russians and the Germans, that there can never be a prosperous Europe, because it's so obvious what Europe would need to be prosperous. It would need to have a deal with Russia. It had the cheapest oil and gas anywhere on the planet, and it's what made it successful.
And
But
that's why
that
it had to be broken up.
that's why, yeah, absolutely. And I think this war for Trump solves that issue as well, right? And of course, we all know how it benefits the Israelis. The Israelis want American boys to die in Iran so that they never have to worry about any competitor. And of course, the Israelis are already suggesting that after Iran, we're going to have to go to Turkey. Turkey's the next one. We're going to have to fix Turkey. Now, just today, there were thousands in Syria that were saying we have to have a jihad against Israel. Now, Jelani, Mr. Former ISIS and Mr. Former Al Qaeda, those guys, um, they're trying to stop these people from forming some kind of militias to go fight. Essentially, they would be fighting alongside their enemies, Hezbollah, right? And Hezbollah has had a very successful week. They've very much slowed down the Israeli advance into southern Lebanon to the Litani River. They've lost 2 villages today, and over 121 tanks have been hit. Now, I'll say right off the bat that a lot of these tanks can be repaired, but they're out of service. And if you watch the videos, these tanks are completely on their own. There's no one about, right? They're not operating the way you've seen them operate in Ukraine. So essentially, these guys are afraid to get out and fight openly, or they're using a strategy they don't feel they have to do that. Also, news has come that 3 UN peacekeepers have been killed. Of course, the Lebanese army is nowhere in sight, and the Israelis have begun destroying Shia neighborhoods. The Shias are running for cover in Christian neighborhoods, and now they're destroying those neighborhoods and trying to create a wedge between Christians and Muslims.
Just like
Uh,
they did in the 70s. And
exactly.
what it looks like right now is particularly the Maronites, which has been, I
Yeah.
wouldn't necessarily call them pro-Israel, but the most pro-Israel faction in Lebanon, the ones who are always the allies of convenience, who always got the knife plunged in their back at the end of the day. Even they're done. They're not taking any more fell for it again worse than the Israelis, to the point where the Maronites are more sympathetic to Hezbollah now. And anyone who knows that history should know that's unthinkable than they are Israel.
Yeah, in the 80s that was unthinkable, but as we found out from our friends over at World War Now, Conrad mentioned about a week or 2 weeks ago that Hezbollah has a Christian faction. Orthodox and Catholics are fighting in this faction.
Look, I'll just say purely objectively, not making a judgment one way or another, the Syrian civil war did amazing things for the reputation among the Middle Eastern Christian communities.
Absolutely, absolutely. They earned their trust. They earned their trust. They proved their bravery, their loyalty. They proved that they would be willing to die to defend Christian towns. Something I don't know. Have the Americans ever done that in the last 30 years? I don't know. They've killed a lot of Christians. Of course, those aren't real Christians because they have all the
Uh,
trappings of old rituals and so forth
well,
and
no,
so on.
they don't pledge loyalty to Paula White, therefore they're out of communion with the true church.
Yeah, they don't have women in business pants and business suits.
With 3 divorces under their belt.
Yeah, 3 divorces. What a you see this woman, it makes complete sense why she's been divorced 3 times. So I think that's where we're at. We're at this point now. Trump is hesitant to go in. Of course, he's waiting for a buildup of forces, but there's still not that many. And he keeps talking about he's going to leave in 2, 3 weeks. Of course, the markets don't believe him. You know, when he started talking, oil was at like $102, and then it went to 106, and then it ended at 112.
Hold on, let me pull up Gulf Sentinel. I need to see what it's at right now. According to Gulf Sentinel, Brent crude is at $109.03, up $8.27 since yesterday. Not
Y-
$8, 8.27%.
Right.
Not $8 and correction. So, but yeah, that's what it's at right now. And according to their metrics, global crude oil supplies, at least in terms of the Gulf, are significantly damaged, which means prices are up 15 to $5 to $15 a barrel from what they were before the war started. And same thing with the LNG exports. That's about um, $15 up from where it started. In that it's not as bad as it was, say, in the opening weeks of the war, because some ships have gotten through for paying the uh, effectively the toll the Iranians have been charging them. But it's still, once again, the global economy is going to feel this, even if miraculously Trump got his vaunted ceasefire he wants tomorrow and the Iranians do X, Y, and Z. The cascading effects of the economic crisis that was caused in the month of March of 2026 is going to last for years.
Right. So, uh, the long-standing effects are going to kick in. Um, I guess people have to prepare for that. Uh, I'm still glued to see what is going to happen. A lot of people are betting that Trump really is going to send in forces. Now, one of the most ridiculous theories I've heard is that, they're going to try to extract, the 60% enriched uranium, apparently 400 kilograms of this.
It's okay. The SEAL team is on it. They're going to be able to grab all of it, and
Yeah.
they're going to be able to hit every potential point in which the enriched uranium is stored. And then, which funny enough, Trump projected that same deal for the Russians to take custodianship of it.
Yeah.
Which, if your concern is Iran not building the bomb, which I think is a reasonable concern, and just the overall situation of, I think the fewer nuclear weapons, the better. Now, I think that would have to be coupled with maybe some skepticism of what's going on in Demona, maybe just a little bit. But it it is ridiculous theory. It is cope, and I'll talk about the logistics, if you want to call it that, of a ground operation or lack thereof, or what we might actually see. And there's been people who have discussed this at great length. History Legends did a good video detailing what such an operation might look like. He also did a good follow up video on U.S. aircraft losses, which have been. We really haven't
Extensive.
seen these kind of numbers since Vietnam. And that's not even counting the unmanned vehicles like the drones, like the MQ-9 Reapers that I shouldn't say
The
regularly, but
the 17th Reaper was downed just today.
yes, I knew it was getting up there in terms of that. But the unmanned systems have had a propensity of getting hit more than the manned systems. But most notably was the F-35 that was struck and
Yep.
crash landed in Iraq. Now, it had to land due to mechanical difficulties caused by enemy fire. So I don't know what else you'd call that besides a
Yeah.
crash landing. And
And today, an F-18 or possibly an F-16 was shot. Now, it's firing flares, it's shot, but we don't know whether it crashed or
the
not,
ghost of
or
Kuwait strikes again. And
so we don't know for sure, but we'll just we have to wait. And of course, they're invested in like not telling you because it just looks bad.
no, and they keep tight-lipped about this. And this isn't anything new. This isn't anything unique. There's always an information lid in any war on
Yep.
casualties, on equipment losses. Anyone who's been following the Ukraine situation for the past 4 years knows this very well. And I do think that in some sense it can be justified for just
Well,
control of information,
morale. Yeah.
morale, control of information. But once again, there comes a point where when every aircraft you lose is due to an accident or a mechanical failure or some sort of just random excuse, and you saw this in some parts of the Ukraine war around the 2023 offensive about NATO personnel who just got into these freak accidents across Eastern Europe. U.S. troop station in Estonia got into some vehicle accident. One of them got
Yeah.
lost in the forest or whatever. It's like we all know that they were doing some sort of operations in Ukraine and that they were casualties of those. And now, in that case, it's much harder to come out and say that. But in a case when we are actively engaged in conflict with the Iranians, they have to be, for the sake of their own war effort, honestly, a little bit more forthright about what's actually happening here. And the concern is that the American public and even the American military, and we see what's happening with the Gerald Ford aircraft carrier, where it's just in complete revolt, in the most deniable way possible. Laundry fire, plumbing issues, just everything that can go wrong is going wrong, and at a certain point, it no longer looks like a coincidence. But they have to keep a lid on that. But at a certain point, when you have this just completely rose tinted vision of the state of the war and how things are going, and that all of our losses are just accidents or mechanical issues, that starts to raise more questions than just giving a small sliver of the truth. Because people can accept that, and they can accept, oh yeah, we're probably not going to hear the end of this until this war is over. And it does make you wonder, to return to the point of a larger operation, about these Marine Expeditionary Units that they had to send all the way from Okinawa in the Pacific to take these operations. Now, the one that everyone's bloviating about, including Trump himself, is Karg Island, which is right there nestled by Iraq into the Persian Gulf, and just beyond the issues of entry past the Strait of Hormuz in order to land a force there. It's still within well range of Iranian drones, missiles, and even conventional artillery at that point. Some people say Qasem Island, which is much closer to the strait itself, and then some say that they're going to be conducting escort operations. As for what these guys are going to do, as for what the 82nd is going to do, I sincerely have no idea, but they've worked themselves into a point where they have to do some sort of ground operation. And that might just be a quote-unquote raid where they claim to seize all the enriched uranium, send these guys in to go blow up a compound somewhere and say, we did it, mission accomplished. And of course, that won't stop the constant barrage of missiles back and forth. That won't stop the combat operations that are going on right now, because we can all tell Trump is desperate to get out of this. His own allies are pissed off at him. His own base is pissed off at him. The man looks as ragged as I had ever seen him. Even look, and I know
Yeah.
he's pushing 80, but still, this is a man under immense pressure in a war that ultimately he chose to initiate and get himself involved in. There were a number of times, even with the near hegemonic influence of the Israeli lobby, he could have at least tapped the brakes a little, found some way to prevent this from flaring into what it is today. But now we run into the issues where the Iranians have shown, not without great losses, but they are a formidable force who can punch well above their weight. And they're not in any mood to make any concessions of their own, because they're more than satisfied. They've accepted that the American empire, the Israeli network, is at war with us. So we are going to respond in kind. And that's been the calculus of the Iranians thus far. And they show no willingness to budge to any of the frankly absurd American demands that Kushner and Witkoff can allegedly communicate through some Pakistani emissary to the Omanis and then to the Iranians, whatever convoluted system they have there. All the talks that may or may not be happening because Trump changes his mind every day on that. We're secretly in talks. We have a new regime. I guess Pezeshkian is secretly running the resistance from the underground, or whoever the Speaker of the House that came out and denied that he was in talks or cooperation with the Americans. Trump, in his speech on Tuesday night, claimed regime change. It's just all over the place, which
I love how he felt he had to address the nation. And all it is was a condensed 18 minutes, roughly speaking, of everything he's been saying like for the last 4 weeks,
it's just been reading verbatim social
including the
posts.
contradictions, including the contradictions. But my favorite was he had a gaffe. He had another engagement where he gave a speech, and he let out that um, he spoke with Keir Starmer and told him in February that he was going in. He was going to bring war to Iran, and that he wanted Starmer to join him, and Starmer said no.
yeah,
Immediately after he said this, he said, "But we got a great military." Am I right?
yeah, and that they need to find their delayed courage to go
Yeah, yeah.
free this. I swear, if I didn't know any better, they were just putting Truth Social posts into his teleprompter because
I know. Yeah, it's almost verbatim.
the speechwriters, it was the easiest, or better yet, they took some AI program. They're like, "Hey, condense this into a 20-minute speech for the nation," and it was like, okay, and that was feels like that's
Chat GPT.
yeah, Chat GPT.
Turn your social post into a speech.
Man, talk about losing your luster. I was talking to you about
He
this, but
has no legacy now. And I think part of the reason he talks the way he does is he knows he has no legacy. He will finish his life in infamy now.
yeah, that's the bargain he made. That's the Faustian bargain he made to return to
And
office.
we should mention that he's been talking about fighting Iran since the late 80s, early 90s. You can find him talking to, I think it was Barbara Walters.
That sounds about right.
Yeah. So even then, and of course, he's so proud that he murdered Soleimani, like literally like the best commander against ISIS and Al Qaeda. Remember when the Americans, he was president even then, when the Americans bragged about killing 100 Russian and Syrian-based mercenaries, like some of the Wagner people that were fighting against ISIS. They bragged about that.
Oh yeah, I remember.
Like there are so many Americans that just gloat about this.
And
Absolutely, they hate ISIS, but you know what? They hate Russians even more.
and to return to your point about Soleimani, it was duplicitous because at the same time he coordinated with Americans in both Afghanistan and Iraq on a number of missions.
Yeah.
Where I wouldn't say he was an emissary to the United States, but he had found himself in that role a number of times.
Hmm.
And probably with the Trump administration too. Maybe it's not public information, maybe it's not anything we have context about, or maybe it's very secretly filed away. But it does speak to the same nature of duplicity where you're our friend today, enemy tomorrow. And I will admit the Iranians did play both sides of both the Iraq and Afghanistan war, but at the same time, those are neighboring countries. They're not on some far flung imperial adventure, so it's more excusable, honestly. But
Hmm.
that's what we get right here. And he also bragged about tearing up the JCPOA, the Obama era deal, because Iran would have had a nuke. It would have eviscerated everyone. It would have
Oh
deployed
yeah.
the Samson option. Blah 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 blah. But I would I would say I do think there's going to be a ground operation to some degree, and the reason I say that is because what I said particularly about this war, why I thought it wouldn't start before it started, is that the resources simply aren't there, the logistics simply are not there, It's not realistic. They're not going to gamble everything to try to break the Iranians. Well, they did. And now we're getting into sunk cost. Nobody wants to pull out. Lindsey
Yes.
Graham will tap dance around the issue for his own electoral purposes. All the correct voices will counter signal Trump while ultimately supporting regime change in Iran, as we've seen time again. And yeah, he's going to be the fall guy. Him, Hegseth, all those people.
Lindsey Graham very much is the fat lady singing. If he's singing, then the war is over. He's a better barometer of what will happen than Trump is.
Oh, absolutely. And even his statements, he was talking about winding it down, which in my opinion was tap dancing around the issue, like
Hmm,
where he
hmm,
wants
hmm.
and going back to what you said, signaling that Trump wants to give this a couple more weeks to see if any progress is made. Otherwise, we're going to go home and lick our wounds. But
Yeah, I mean, I thought the Israelis could look at Iran as a big Palestine that they are mowing the lawn. Maybe they feel like once they increase their reserves, their munition reserves. Yeah, for instance, another Patriot system was destroyed yesterday.
oh, really?
Uh, and of course, everybody should watch the History Legend video on just the sheer number of losses. Well, not losses, but use of air defense system missiles, but as well as attack missiles that are very slow to manufacture. Uh, you know, they could do that, right? I mean, the end goal, as I said, is to um, do to Iran what they did to Iraq.
Absolutely. But at the same time, that's also, in my opinion, not on the table, and that you would need the full might of the American military in order to accomplish the kind of goal that they want to accomplish in Iran, which is something that they can simply not afford to do. And then the Israeli question makes it all the more complicated because they were the instigators. They wanted this war. They wanted to implement that kind of regime change
Yep.
on Iran. But at the same time, them, along with the Gulf states, are bearing the brunt of it, where Tel Aviv is under. It's been over 70 missile barrages since the start of the war, missile
Oh
and drone
yeah.
barrages. And the situation is not getting better. There were the rumors of Netanyahu's death. Those turned out to be unsubstantiated. But he's a man who, like the rest of his nation, have to hide in a bunker. And of course, as we've seen with how emergency evacuations work in Israel, non-Israelis are not getting in that bunker. Even their greatest allies, who they have over there, are not getting into the bunker. And it's a nation that is completely paralyzed. Their ground operation in Lebanon, to nobody's shock, has not succeeded. They can never survive ground contact with Hezbollah. They can do all these psyops against the leadership. They can have these brutal air campaigns, but when it comes to on the ground fighting, when it comes to actually taking the necessary steps to dislodge Hezbollah, they can never bear the casualties or make the progress needed to push the Litani River and claim that for their quote unquote greater Israel. And I know I keep hammering on this.
Apparently, there's Israelis that are already, in theory, purchasing land in this area, right? Just like in Syria, in that area just north of the Golan Heights in the lowlands, south of Damascus.
But don't worry,
Uh,
they already hedged their
they want to
bets.
move in. I mean, they can try, but let's say Giuliani loses control. Let's say Israel starts to get antagonistic with Turkey after this fiasco is over. Some of those settlers, they might get the kind of treatment that Palestinian Christians and Muslims are getting in the West Bank. There was an entire Christian village that was attacked by Jewish settlers.
And there it is.
Yeah, now Saudi Arabia is posturing along with some of the other Gulf states that they want Trump to finish this war. I mean, of course, it's like as you said, sunk cost fallacy, right? Um, but they'll never forget that they were completely abandoned. They'll never forget how much this is degrading them as well, and especially Mohammed bin Salman, who's apparently one of the losers that Trump likes to hang with. He loves being surrounded by losers because he's of course a winner. The man that is going to have the worst reputation of any president. He is more unpopular than Jimmy Carter. And
That is the depths that he has descended to. He has joined the ranks of Carter as one of the most impotent presidents in American history.
yeah, and he's really going to have to pull out the proverbial rabbit out of a hat with this war. But as he mentioned, it doesn't look good. And you know, the other thing that it comes back to, especially when we started the show, we were talking about the proposed pipeline that would lead from, the Bars gas field that both Qatar and Iran share, that would go, through Iraq and into Syria and terminate in the Eastern Mediterranean, right? And people have asked, well, why not build a pipeline? Remember Netanyahu last year, or maybe when Biden was still in power, kept bragging about a pipeline that would go from the Persian Gulf across Saudi Arabia through Jordan and again terminate in Haifa. And it hasn't been built. Now, of all of them, the safest one is the second one, right? Because Iraq is not safe for this pipeline.
No, not at
We
all.
have seen what you know Iranian-backed militias are doing to Idlib and the other American bases there. They're evacuating those bases, and the Victoria Hotel in Baghdad, right? But you could argue that going across Saudi Arabia into Jordan and then terminating in Haifa in the Mediterranean, that would be safer. Well, it would be safer, but let's say we have this scenario. Maybe some of the people in Saudi Arabia don't like the approach of Saudi Arabia, and they begin to sabotage the pipeline.
And that's
How
also
about
not
how about
discounting.
Jordan? Jordan is over 50% Palestinian. I mean, it would have to go underground, like, but then that would take even longer. It still hasn't been built, and I've often wondered, like, because of course the whole Abraham Accords meant that they would build this pipeline.
Oh yeah, and now that we've seen post Iran war, or now that we've seen during the Iran war, even if you were to have parts of it underground, the facilities that would have to be above ground are still just as liable to Iranian
Yes.
strikes. They have proven themselves, and that a land-based pipeline would be no more of a target, no less of a target, I should say,
Yeah.
than these freighters that carry the oil and gas via the ocean.
But
And
think of the Houthi.
oh yeah, they would. They've been hitting Saudi energy assets for a decade now.
Yeah, they could target some of the transit hubs.
And I know that they were trying to revive that project, talking about it. Oh, here's how it can alleviate the Straits of Hormuz. Well, if the Iranians have shown that they're willing to go after Gulf energy infrastructure, they're not going to suddenly go hands off on a pipeline. They're going to
Hmm.
hit that just as much as they've hit everything else. And also, Iranian intelligence units, IRGC, whatever elements they can embed in the Gulf societies, which I imagine they probably have a decent amount of infiltration, I would imagine, they're also capable of forming sabotage teams, just like the sabotage team that destroyed the Nord Stream pipeline, because that's the era we're living in right now, and that is the name of the game. So even with that solution, it's too little, too late. Whatever utility it might have had, It's not going to solve anything, and we're not going to get a comprehensive answer to this global energy and resource crisis because a number of different resources, you were saying the helium and the fertilizer are the big ones that come out of the Gulf.
Yeah.
We're not going to get that until either Iran capitulates or Iran is able to renegotiate the security architecture of the region, as it were, which their demands are pretty bold. Now, I'm not expecting the Iranians to be complete hardliners. They could probably be talked down on some of them, but point being is, as it stands now, the Iranians are not any closer to breaking. Now, what I think is truthfully worst case scenario in all of this is that we call it a day, we go home, ceasefire, but every few months we get strikes on Iranian military and infrastructure, and that they try to degrade them the same way that they would have degraded Iraq in the 1990s. I'm not comparing the two countries because it is
right,
much
but it
different
was
case.
11 years.
Yes.
10 to 11 years.
Yes, but I do fear the same model may be applied where it is a
Yeah.
gradual wearing down between that and sanctions and embargoes, where they do try to siege the country over the long term. Now, like I said, the dynamics are very different from Iran itself, geographically, demographically, etc. And also at that point, there was no other patron that was going to take up the Iranian cause, where Russia and China, especially at this point, they're hard pressed to abandon the Iranians because
Yeah.
they know the stakes at this point.
Yeah, they're next. And for that matter, I think even the Turks realized they might be next, or Erdogan specifically.
Yeah, and that bridge is burned once again. The southern flank of NATO just throw every imperial asset at trying to dismantle the empire. And the only sweetening of the pot the Turks have is that gateway to Central Asia, which, once again, that's an ambitious goal, but when you put survival on the line, they're going to pick survival because there's not going to be a Central Asia to dominate, or there's not going to be a Turkey to dominate Central Asia if they continue down this path, if the Likudniks, if broader Israeli state, if we're being honest, gets what it wants and gets the collapse of Turkey. And that's also a dangerous one with that because the spillover is going to go directly into Europe. And also, the PSYOP is going to be strong because you're going to have a lot of Europeans who see the Turks as that spearhead of Islamic civilization pointed at Europe, who are going to be convinced to support this war, not for their own interests. I'm sorry, but if this were to break out, the Israelis are not going to let the Greeks have Constantinople. They'd sooner nuke the Hagia Sophia than give it back to any Christians at all. And that's because we know the way the Israeli state operates. And that goes for any of the other countries that may want to settle, I would say, their legitimate grievances with the Turks over a long history. The Israelis are not going to let you do that. Whatever you want to reclaim, whatever you want, they're going to nuke that. I mean, already they're claiming not only Turkish, but also islands controlled by the Greeks. They don't care about European civilization. If the message is not clear at this
They're
point,
not even Europeans. Jews are not, especially Israeli Jews, are not Europeans.
no, and like whatever trace European they may have brought in from the Ashkenazi or Sephardic, the base of Netanyahu's support, the base of what we know of Israeli society, not to excuse the other one, are these Mizrahi Jews, which are pretty much just Arabs who practice Judaism, if we're being honest.
Yeah.
They're the worst of the Salafist Arabs who just wear the yarmulke instead of the turban, if I can just be so simplistic about it. But no, ideology, behavior, it's all the same. It's all the same. And yeah, as far as you're concerned, this isn't a Judeo-Christian struggle against Islamic civilization. As far as they're concerned, those damn anti-Semites in Europe are the dumping ground for everyone we're going to force out of the region to build greater Israel. And that's what they outright say.
Yes. Yes.
Europe is a trash can to these people. And
yes, they've always hated them, and they've part of it is they've never been able to do to them what they've done to the Palestinians.
oh yeah, they hate it because back when Europe was a continent run by serious people, and I'm not even talking certain 20th century events. I'm talking pre 20th century. They were not
Yes.
able to do those kind of things because, by and large, even in the multi ethnic empires, they lived under governments that somewhat represented them. I'm not going to an idealistic picture here, but while there was the occasional exploitative moneylender, by and far these communities were kept in check by the laws and culture at the time. The laws and
Absolutely.
culture which have been severely degraded, which is why, as we see right now, they constantly push this. It was a write up from before October 7th. One of these policy institutes was that Likud is behind was talking about using Europe as a settling ground for expelled Palestinians, particularly Spain and Greece. And once again, you'll notice that they have no use for Europe at all. But you'll notice that there's a few nations that they just have even more of an intense hatred for. Spain's one of them because of 1492.
Yes.
Russia and Germany for obvious reasons. They also don't like really any of the Balkan nations, Greece, Serbia, etc., because of the history, particularly under the empires that had ruled under that region, and also, despite their current feud with Turkey, they were very chummy with the Ottoman elite. To nobody's surprise with that, and also I've noticed recently Ireland is another country that they do not like to the point
Yes.
where, and the cope is the Irish are pro Palestinian. Well, the Irish are pro Palestinian because the IDF was supporting the Northern Irish before the Irish even took an opinion on the Palestinians. It is a reaction to your actions, and
That's right. A lot of people don't know that. But and also the Irish saw themselves in a similar position as the
true,
Palestinians.
true.
Yeah. But it's more than just that. I think people are familiar with just that aspect.
Yeah, but not the fact that the IDF was operating in Northern Ireland.
Now, maybe just to round out the show, did you want to talk about the upcoming election in Hungary?
Yeah, we can talk about that and just general European news
Yeah.
because Hungary, I am very nervous about. The election will be on April 12th, which is real Easter, not Masonic Easter. For those,
Stop.
I look. I called it Masonic Christmas. I have to, but I
Yeah,
look.
it is hilarious, but come on,
I'll
man. You're
ingest. I'll ingest.
yes, yes, Masonic
That's. Please
Easter.
do not take that seriously. That is if anything I've ever said is a joke on this program, it is that it's the Masonic Christmas
Yes.
count. It's just
My brother loves that one, by the way. He just
no, it was good. I came with it on the fly. I just did.
it's brilliant.
Um, but with that being
Masonic.
said, Orban, the the pollsters, the professional gamblers, they put him at a 33% chance of winning. With Europe's golden boy, Peter Magyar, could not have picked a dumber name for a color revolution candidate, if I'm being honest,
Yeah.
is the favorite to win. And he is all the normal pro EU, pro Ukraine nonsense. And it has been a two pronged attack where the Brussels establishment has been coming down on Hungary for a number of years, but also using the Ukrainians as a proxy to come down on them, particularly through the Druzhba pipeline, through a number of just different scandals that come up time after time. But Orban, first and foremost, he hitched his wagon to Trump, and that I think is going to be his fatal
Yes, and
downfall,
it's a toxic brand,
especially now.
and especially now. And I knew it right away when Trump had won the election. Uh, Trudeau had left office. He had essentially resigned, did vote of no confidence, and um, they had the leadership, and Carney was chosen. And I knew that as soon as he made those statements about taking over Canada and Greenland, but not the Canadians think very much about Greenland. It's neither here nor there. But as soon as he made those comments, I knew that guy, Poilievre was gone. He was finished. absolutely finished. He was going to be considered unpatriotic, a traitor to the country, and which goes to show you for a vassal of America to presume that much autonomy is surprising, but it is there. And Carney knew that he would win, and he did. And that's the same dynamic is playing out in Hungary right now because Trump is absolutely toxic.
Oh yeah,
He
but it does get worse because something I was recently brought back to my attention is that Pompeo's State Department in 2018 supported the Hungarian opposition against Orban.
yeah,
And that's also combined with the fact that Orban also openly defied Trump over the Russian energy discussion in the autumn of 2025. So while there might not have been any public counter signaling,
right.
it's a multi-pronged attack where he has the toxicity of Trump's brand attached to him. He was called the Trump of Europe all the way back in 2015, so it's a long-standing reputation, which has only gotten worse over time. And then that's combined with a Trump administration that isn't even necessarily on his side beyond rhetoric, combined with the European Union who wants to make an example of this country, and a deranged regime in Kiev who are more than willing to assist all of the above in order to just get one over on anyone who doesn't give complete fealty to them. And that all culminates in what is likely going to be a loss for Viktor Orban. And after that, I might be as bold to say, I was saying this off air and I've been thinking about it. I think I'm willing to say that at least, I don't know if they'll succeed, but what they want to do in a post Orban Hungary is impose a humiliation greater to, equal than, if not greater than, the humiliation of Trianon. That they want this country completely beaten down, completely demoralized. They want this country
They
to
want a gay. They want
exactly.
a gay. They want the Soros lawyers. They want the Soros institution apparatchiks to have a victory, and they want all the stuff that he stopped, like gay education in public schools, trans operations. They want all of that because it's very hard to fathom what exactly will they get with concern for the Ukrainian war from Hungary if they have Magyar instead of Orban.
Yeah,
What
just
what what do they get? I mean, 90% of the time Orban would fold. He has to. He doesn't have that kind of leverage.
yeah, just slightly less
Sometimes he's an
politicking in.
obstacle. Yeah, I mean, it's simply a morale boost. Now, Magyar going in there, if 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 for whatever reason oil and gas supplies to Hungary benefit Hungary, regardless of the leader, but they don't benefit uh, Ukraine, Ukraine isn't going to give that gas to them. They will gain nothing out of this. This is strictly a moral, ideological victory for Global Homo. That's all it is.
Oh, absolutely.
Uh, they there's what more arms can Hungary give that it hasn't already given? Hungary was already supplying Ukraine with arms well before the SMO. So what does it have in its reserves that it does, that Magyar is going to be able to find that Orban cannot?
I do think that there is another angle we can look at this if we look to the south, and that is Orban's
Yes,
push
closing
to,
up with Serbia. Yeah.
yes, with Serbia, with Dodik, with Vucic, where you've had Hungary and Serbia offset Croatia, Kosovo, and Bulgaria, which have coalesced
Yeah.
together even within the broader American empire in that region in order to squeeze out Serbia. And with that, that leaves Vucic completely isolated. He's cut
Yes,
off.
and that would be just another more. That would be it's a revenge fantasy. They are countries that cannot assist neither Russia nor Ukraine. But because they're ideologically different than, they must be punished. Their resistance, all these decades, must be punished. And that's all this is. It's vengeance.
uh, plain and simple. And then that leaves Fico as the last man standing, and
Yeah,
without any network, really, what chance does he stand?
yeah, yes, sadly.
And I mean, I hope I'm wrong about all of this. I hope Orban can pull off an upset in the election, but I do fear that if that is the case, you're going to have all the force of Brussels coming down, all the domestic courts that they can get to turn against Orban, and they're going to do what they did to Georgescu in Romania, where they will find a way, even if he is able to pull this out of hat, they will find a way to litigate him out of office. And because once again,
Well, look what they did in Romania.
exactly,
They
one
just pulled the plug. We're not going to, no, he didn't win. We're not going to have the election. No, he can't be a candidate. Why? Because, well, America said so.
yeah, and it's a no-win situation because if he loses, then it's everything we said is proven true. If he wins, he's not going to be allowed to take office again, and
Yes.
they'll do the same to Fico eventually.
Yeah.
And
Now, Romania is a country that can offer, because of its strategic position on the Black Sea, that's a country that can offer, well, not much, but it offers land. Will it offer its forces? I don't know. Bulgaria, similar situation. They just signed a defense pact with the Americans, and another one with the Ukrainians. So I don't know. I mean, Europe. I mean, long term, the problems that Europe has right now are still going to persist. Getting rid of Orban and Vucic and Fico are not going to make you wealthier. They're not going to give you cheaper gas.
but it makes Soros
It's
happy.
it's it's strictly ideological and emotional. It has no benefits, and it only benefits a certain small urban elite, and that's it. So long term, what are these countries going to do? Because prices for the cost of living is going to increase. And my fear is that they're going to increase. And at the moment that they think they're going to lose everything, right? Because, getting, lapdogs for Globo Homo in power is not going to change the lives of these people. And if they begin to become fearful, then that's, I don't know. Is that when they have like a false flag and then they're told to go into Ukraine? It and simultaneously, Trump is bogged down in Iran. I don't know how that scenario is going to unfold. Uh, but I don't see a future where like any once you get rid of these candidates, nothing happens. Not materially, their lives don't change. Culturally, yes, they will change. And that's what's so disgusting is their vindictiveness, is to essentially rape their kids. That's what's so sick about this. Um,
I do have a little bit more of
mm,
a reach of a question, but I think long-term implications worth exploring given current tensions. If the electoral solutions, if the ballot box is shown to be a worthless gesture in the event that Orban loses and life doesn't improve, or in the event that he gets the Georgescu treatment where he wins but is legally prevented from winning, at that point, do we see a situation? Like I said, this is a big stretch, but considering the tension in the region, at that point, do we see, for example, say the Bosnian Serbs realize that there is no avenue in electoral politics and move towards secession? Or some sort of similar crisis where they realize we're not going to vote our way out of this and they take a much more resolute stance. I don't think it's going to happen necessarily to that extent, But I do think it puts the idea out there, which makes it a lot more likely than it was before.
Hmm. I mean, Kaya Kallas is suggesting that that Hungary be kicked out of NATO. I mean,
Please do.
why?
Please do it.
Yeah, please do. I know exactly. Do it. I mean, they're lying just as much as Trump is saying he's going to leave NATO. He's not going to leave NATO. It's an American project, and it's not going to go away. But uh, um, it's. I mean, you have a non-NATO country like Ukraine who is stopping gas flows into a NATO country, which is Hungary, right? Which tells you that Ukraine is the most NATO country. It has leverage over every other NATO country in the same way that Israel has so much leverage over America.
Yeah, there's really no two ways about it. And I mean, what else can you say? Because it's Europe is on this death march. I don't know what else you want to call it.
Yeah, and you know, and that's why they don't. Just to repeat myself, that's why they don't want Trump going into Iran. It's not because it's not because of moral reasons. It's not even the obvious pragmatic reasons, like you're unprepared, not enough forces. Is it even going to work,
Strait of Hormuz, etc.
etc. Right? The main reason is, what do we do about Ukraine? If you go in there, we can't defeat Russia in Ukraine. That's their objection because they have completely bought this war. This war was forced on them. They there was division amongst the various nations in the EU and in NATO, and eventually they took it as their own war. That's what Biden did to them, and Trump reinforces this ridiculous narrative, as if in one of his ridiculous statements that he often repeats is that Europe dragged America into this war. Are you kidding me? I mean, it was America that established CIA bases, 14 of them, along the Russian-Ukrainian border. Not NATO, not the EU, not Poland, not Germany or France
I
or
know it was
Britain.
disingenuous, but Merkel negotiated Minsk too.
Yeah. I mean, say what you will, but Minsk 2 is still not the same thing as what we have now.
Exactly. And I suppose on that note, is there really a better time than for Aristovich's suggestion of Russia and Ukraine uniting to crush the toy armies of Europe? Because now it seems
The,
like good a time as
the
ever.
I love that he calls it toy armies of Europe because it's such a European thing to say. Because like like I mean they were popular here too, but the toy armies and everything, that was like a remember that as a kid, that was a very popular thing to get. Boys loved those, and the toy armies. It's
Yeah,
it's,
yeah,
it's so
the
specific.
little Napoleonic guys, you just have them, and the cannons, and it's just. But I mean, I you, I don't want to read too much into this, but you're already seeing the revenge fantasy of some of these Ukrainians who are saying, "Well, if you let us fall to Russia, we'll just join the Russians and crush Europe." And Arostovich said that 4 years ago at this point,
Yeah, he did.
and it makes it.
And America's aware of that.
Oh yeah, yeah, and
That's why it wants Russia and Ukraine destroyed.
oh, absolutely. That Ukraine has to be the sacrificial lamb. Ukraine has to destroy itself to destroy Russia, and that is the model. Because even if the Banderistan people get their dream of greater Ukraine, America's not going to tolerate that. They're not going to tolerate the at this point, excluding Russia, the most powerful military in Europe having any sort of degree of independence, and that Ukraine needs to be sacrificed for that reason. And
Hmm.
we are in a position just to reinforce it that if that scenario were to happen, if and I'm not even talking about the idea of Russia and Ukraine uniting, but in the event of a Ukrainian defeat that dragged Europe into a wider war on the continent, without those American backstops, if Trump is still running up against the wall, charging his head against the wall in Iran, it's going to be a bloody fight. It's not one I want to see, but
Yeah.
the Russians will ultimately prevail over the European militaries on even just logistics alone, not even talking about fighting skill. And that's assuming it doesn't go nuclear. But one does have to wonder. Uh,
Yeah, everything's at stake.
yeah,
I mean, it also depends on how crazy like some of the European leaders might be, how invested they are in this. I have a feeling that, if America really does get bogged down in Iran, like if it becomes another stupid decision like Iran or Afghanistan, and there's a good chance it might not be, but if that's the case, um, based on what I'm seeing, the Europeans aren't going to rush in. I mean, you have Austria, landlocked Austria, telling Trump you can't fly over our airspace. As
Gunther Fehlinger is lamenting right now.
the man is wrecked. But you know what I mean? Like Italy is saying you can't use the basis for attacks. Now Starmer is being crafty because he's allowing them to use them to some degree, particularly the bombers. But overall, he's not going to send any ships, no matter how much Trump tries to embarrass him.
Yeah,
They're
he
not
doesn't have the
they're not
delayed
going in.
courage.
Hmm?
He doesn't have the delayed courage to
Yeah, the
do it.
delayed courage. Crafty, so
Ugh,
crafty.
so stupid.
He thinks he can shame them into it. It
He really has been
I
spending too
mean,
much time
maybe
around the
some of them have
Jews.
figured it out. Like the whole point is like the rest of the world burns and America has the Western Hemisphere, and that's that. A recession takes Asia, Russia's destroyed, can't supply China enough oil and gas. Like that's ultimately what America wants.
Oh yeah, that's what they want, and the problem with that, even taking the idea at its merits, is they're not decoupled enough from the global economy to insulate themselves from those effects. That
That's right. That's right.
uh, because the plan was we're going to reshore everything, we're going to become much more autarkic beforehand, and then let the world burn. But it turns
Yeah.
out that we are still mutually invested to the tune of trillions of dollars with China, hundreds of billions in the Gulf states, and once again hundreds of billions in Europe as well. So while we might be able to survive in a material sense, the wealth and prosperity that's supposed to define America will evaporate with the global economy because we are still the engine of the global economy and we are not decoupled from that. So the idea of re-entrenchment without all of those prerequisites is a path to ruin, which is the
Hmm.
damned if we do, damned if we don't situation we find ourselves in because the outside world's not getting any better, and that's in no small part thanks to the actions of the United States.
Yeah.
Yeah, what else can you really say? But what I do think will be interesting, I said this the last episode or two, is the real litmus test for Europe about whether they're actually panicking or whether they're disappointed is, do they act in a way that they think, for example, Gavin Newsom will be able to smooth everything over, or are they making
Mm.
actual contingency plans for a post-America world? And honestly, at this
I think
point,
they're making for a Gavin Newsom America world. Personally, I,
I
I think they're waiting it out. I think they know Trump is finished.
yeah,
He finished himself. He did what they couldn't. They called him daddy. They called him everything they could to appease him.
Mark Rutte ruined his reputation to try to appease the great Trump, and it couldn't happen to a nicer person. Let me just put
Yeah,
it that
Rutte is supposed to be coming next week for a visit to Washington.
way. Ugh. But no, I agree with you. Right now, it seems like they're trying to weather the storm. But as this continues to go on, how many of them are going to be convinced that Blue America is the solution and not that The
Mm-hmm.
empire itself, the imperial core itself is no longer liable. And unfortunately, because of the makeup of the European elite, I think they're going to hedge their bets completely on Blue America to their own demise, not just to their own detriment, but to their own demise.
Yeah.
But what more can you expect from Starmer, Macron, and even our so-called populists like Maloney? I mean, it's a pretty sad state of affairs. I had to say, it's a pretty sad state of affairs when the Japanese, who are probably under the tightest occupation, bar the Germans, are able to act with more laterality and independence amidst this crisis than anywhere in Europe.
Yeah, and in some ways, they seem to know what their value is to the empire better than the
Oh yeah,
Europeans do.
they've leveraged their position wisely, and I've said for a number of years, I think the Japanese, if they play their cards right, if they have a shrewd enough leadership, they could play the game that Turkey does. Now I know the
Mm-hmm.
dynamics of
Mm-hmm.
Turkey are changing rapidly, but just as on an overall scale, where they can be the middle power between America and China, and I think even with this woman, think what you will of her, but just as in terms of overall policy, I think the Japanese state at least realizes that is the optimal survival strategy in this new world. Now, I don't think it's going to be an overnight process. I think there's still plenty of pro Washington people within the establishment of the Japanese state, but I do think there is more of an off ramp for them than just about anyone in Europe at this point.
Yes, and part of that is because of the war in Ukraine.
Absolutely. That Ukraine was
Should
betting.
anything happen with Taiwan, they will find themselves in the same position. However, speaking of visits, the opposition leader for Taiwan is going to be visiting China next week as well.
And
China wants a peaceful reunification with Taiwan.
that's something we've said was always on the table because people
Yeah.
always war game the scenario that China is going to invade Taiwan and take it by force. But I've always been more of the opinion that if we're going to see a reunification,
China's saying like, you guys don't even have enough ammunition to fight for a month, let alone you're not prepared.
yeah, but the question of a bloodless reunification does raise some eyebrows. Like, what is the response to that? Because there's not the overt military action that they can get up there and morally harangue about, and that it puts everyone in a much more precarious position. Which,
And you can see that using this approach, right? Let's say Trump goes in 2 weeks from now, he has forces there. Maybe one or two mass casualty events, a helicopter is knocked down, right? Drones, the kind that we see in Ukraine. Are Americans ready to see like American guys running away from drones? Are they ready for that? It was different watching Russians and Ukrainians,
oh,
but
absolutely.
it's going to be one of their own now. I mean, if you look carefully, there's been Americans who've been killed like that in Ukraine as well, fighting for Ukraine. Um,
But it would carry different weight. In
but let's suppose Trump has his feet in the cement in Iran, and the Chinese make an agreement with the Taiwanese to unify, similar kind of deal with Hong Kong, and it's done. No war. What's Japan going to do? How's Japan going to look if nobody really wants to be rescued by Japan? What's Australia going to do? I mean, Albanese is talking about please use public transit, uh, ration your gas. There's various countries are using all kinds of methods about restricting price increases to only once a day and et cetera, et cetera. So what does America do then, right? If that agreement is ratified, right, like what's the point anymore? It's at that point, if that happens, then it's truly over, right? And maybe that's when Israel does something crazy
Yeah,
because it knows it can't live without America.
absolutely. And that is when they take the desperate action. That's when you start to see the Samson option. I think what a lot of people forget about the Samson option is it's not just a targeted strike against their enemies. It is punishment for their quote unquote friends they feel betrayed them as well. And
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
they're just gonna, if they think that they're going down, they want to take the entire world with them. But
Yeah.
that depends on, I suppose, who is in the driver's seat in Israel, because I'm not saying probably, but I think it's a possibility where everyone in Israel starts looking at their second passport. How is Patagonia this time of year? I hear Millet is opening up land in Argentina for us to buy after wildfires. Isn't that just convenient? Stuff like that.
Yes.
Stuff like that. I mean, we already see the Israeli boats that show up in Cyprus, and just we see the lines at Ben Gurion Airport at least before the war every time the inkling of crisis rears its ugly head. But it does, to return to the Asia Pacific question. It does would force Japan to completely reevaluate its role in
Hmm.
the event of a bloodless reunification of Taiwan, for, as you said, the Hong Kong model, where we're not the defender, we're not the head of the first island chain. Or on the same note, after that, the Philippines also makes their peace with China, as they had before American investment in military assets started pouring in, and the Japanese are forced to reevaluate their role as that real nexus of American power in the region, and might have to take a more pragmatic and balanced approach for the sake of its own continuation into the future.
Hmm.
And that is why I think we get into critical territory for the American empire, as you were alluding to, when we've lost our Atlantic flank, we lose our Pacific flank, or at least our Pacific flank is greatly diminished. And that doesn't sound like the country that can be a lion for Zion or a shield for the great Israeli state. And then they panic, they schwitz, and they do some crazy things, possibly. Or what one might hope is they see the writing on the wall and they plan their exfiltration. But it could really go either way,
Yeah,
as well as
it
you said.
could. It could. There's no reason why Israel can't fail. Why it just stops existing as a state
Yeah,
in the
there's
next 3 to 5 years. That's the curse, yeah.
yeah, yeah,
There's
yeah.
that too. But there's no reason why that can't happen.
No, they're not unique. They're not exceptional. It is interesting because I think it's so heavily propagandized that even people who are anti-Israel buy into this idea that they are a unique state just because it's just
Yeah.
shoved down our throats so much. But no, they are a country the size of New Jersey with 9 million people at best that just so happen to get its hand on a few dozen nuclear warheads. Other than that, they are a pissant country. It just looking at their geography is terrible. No strategic depth. Any competent fighting force could have rallied its neighbors against them and crushed them like an ant, really, decades ago if they wanted to. And it is because of Sunni Arab dysfunction that Israel has survived as long as it has. And it's just that simple. But that's really all I had to say for this edition of the War Report. If you have any final comments, the floor is yours.
No, that's it for me too.
And just to clarify once again, what I said earlier was a joke. I hope everyone celebrating
Yeah,
this
we
weekend has
want
a
to wish
very
you
nice
guys,
Easter.
yes, everybody who's celebrating this Easter, God bless you, and have a wonderful Easter.
Certainly, and we'll be back at some point in the next week or so. You know our schedule. You can always expect us once every 3 weeks. That's why that's my bare minimum. I try to do it more often than then. But you know what? We'll get there when we get there. Thank you everyone for tuning in this episode of the War Report, and goodbye.
Goodbye and take care.